Hey, Roger,
Thank
thanks
you.
for joining us at the last minute today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Glad to be here. Yeah, I just basically just flew in here. So I got your email seconds ago, and here I am.
I love it. Okay, Roger has been a guest on the show before. Roger has made so many documentaries. Roger, also for our audience, so they know, you are the editor who has worked with Larry David on how many, all the seasons of Curb Your Enthusiasm?
About half. Yeah, the last six. There's been 12 seasons, so I worked on the back six, and it's the best. Been the best job of my life. Imagine sitting in a room with Larry David and talking to him and joking and hearing him talk about his life, and then an anecdote he tells ends up being an episode of a next season. It's just it's an amazing job.
Well, you've told me stories privately. You get the unfiltered Larry David, and you really, I mean, it's a lot of cringe. I gotta say, but that's part of his comedy, cringe comedy.
Yeah, unfiltered and filtered. He's pretty much when you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, it really is a restaging of events that happened in his life. Exaggerated for comedy, obviously at times, but he lives it. That's his research. He just has to walk out his front door and go somewhere, and he comes home with an episode.
Oh my god! But you've also made just a lot of documentaries. You made tell us about before we talk about the book. Tell us about you have your filmography is vast.
I started with Trekkies, as you well know. That was my first documentary, and it was sort of an accident. I didn't move to Hollywood thinking, hey, I'm going to make documentaries. But I made my first film, and I cast Denise Crosby in it. We stayed in touch, and then a few years later, we were having lunch, and she pitched me. She said, I've been going to these conventions of Star Trek fans, and they're really something else. Someone should make a documentary about this. And we were shocked that no one had done it yet. It seemed so obvious. And so we'd never made anything. We didn't know what we were doing. We just watched other documentaries to learn how to do it and made Trekkies. It's in many ways, it's the genesis of my book about how to make documentaries, because all the mistakes we made gave me the impetus to write the book so other people can avoid these pitfalls. And despite all the mistakes in Trekkies, it became very successful. Obviously, I mean, it bought my house. It was sold for the second highest advance at the time after Roger and Me when we finally sold it to Paramount. And I tell the story of the making and selling of Trekkies in the book, The Documentarian. But that was the beginning, and it's like, should I make a documentary? You make one documentary and you're hooked. It's like, I'll just try one bump of heroin.
Right.
It's so exciting. You can't stop. And so I've made several others since.
Well, I remember Trekkies. Before I knew you, I did not know you. I'm still a Star Trek fan. I love the old school Star Trek. And that doc totally captured like the scene and the variety of fandom, from people who are just normal, regular fans to people who take it really far, wearing uniforms to court. Right? Like
Barbara Adams did that,
yeah,
yes, and we profiled her.
You found all these beautiful, beautiful stories, but you've also your other documentary, "The Truth About Marriage," amazing. That was fantastic. I think I interviewed you for that when that doc came out.
Yes, I came to your lair. I remember you had that amazing table that was a giant cassette tape. Do you still have that?
I still have it.
I love that. That was amazing. Yeah, so that was my most recent documentary, where I solved the mystery of why are relationships and marriages so hard for human beings, because they have a 50% failure rate. I mean, if you bought a car from a dealership and 50% of them failed, they should go back to the drawing board. But for some reason, everyone still wants this product. So that was the mystery I solved.
Right. Now, through this book, let's talk about the book, because I like to, with my audience, and we've got almost 2,000 people watching us live. I love to bring them real info. How do you really do something, the nitty gritty? And you're so prolific in your work. What made you want to write a book? Because can I just tell you something? Probably not going to get rich from this book. It's a very narrow market.
That's so true. They're really niche books. I mean, my book about editing and my
Yeah,
book about making documentaries, for the most part, they're for film students, novices, anyone who's interested. I mean, I've got here to answer your question directly. I get this statement all the time from people. Oh, I've got this great idea for a documentary. What do you think about this? And they pitch me their idea. And it's usually a pretty good idea. So my answer is often, that's great. Do you have 200 grand you can put up? And
right.
and so, they're very quick to spend my time and money and 2, 3, 4 years, 7 years in the marriage documentary, but not so much their own. You don't have to take that long. I mean, Trekkies took 9 months, so that was the shorter end of the spectrum. But if you do have a great idea for a documentary, in the book, I lay out exactly what it takes. Okay, what do I do with an idea? How do I get it to the pitching stage? How do I sell it? How do I raise money? Now that I've done that, how do I do interviews properly? How do I find people to interview? How do you end a documentary? I'll tell you, here's the biggest mistake. If your listeners go away with one piece of advice, if they're thinking of making a documentary, the biggest mistake, and I realized during making Trekkies, I was making this mistake, or one of the biggest, is I didn't know what the theme of the film was. What is a theme? You need to know your theme. That's where you start out. And a theme, it's like the moral of the story. It's the lesson at the end. It's what you discover if you're the investigator making Food Inc., which one of my favorite examples. Their core question was, why is corporate farming food so bad for humans? They set out to solve that mystery. They get an answer. You get an answer at the end. And so the theme of that documentary is that corporate farming, corporate food is bad for humans. Themes can be anything like, love conquers all, or absolute power corrupts absolutely. Once you know your theme, that message that's inside you, that's bursting to get out, the reason you must make this documentary, it's like, why are marriages so difficult? Once you know what that is, now when you're editing and shooting and interviewing, you understand what belongs in the film and what doesn't. And if it doesn't line up with your theme, you cut it out. Or if it does, that's the roadmap that often is missing when people pitch me an idea and I say, okay, great idea. What's your theme? If they can answer that, figure that out, then they've probably got a really solid project.
Can I tell you about a documentary? I made a documentary called Attack of the Doc. And exactly what you just said. I had a theme in mind. I had a what I wanted to say with the doc, which was about how things have changed. The nerd world has changed, how much it has evolved. That it's about the show Attack of the Show, and it there's a song in the documentary that we turned into a music video. Said you can't do that no more. And it was looking at this era when you could get away with anything on TV, and now you can't. And what is the fallout from that, from cancel culture? That was a theme, a thread that ran through the entire movie. And if something didn't fit that theme, it wasn't in the film. So I knew that before I did the first interview, I knew what I wanted to say with the doc, and that's how I started. Exactly what you just said. When filmmaker comes to me and they'll say, well, I'm going to see where the story goes, you don't really have a doc. You're exploring. I would say do more research. It's expensive to make a doc. Time, crew, even if it's only you, still, you got to kind of know what you're going to do going forward. I brought up the link while you were talking to Amazon to buy the book. I'll put it in the description for this show to buy it on Amazon. Do you have a website we can go to as well?
No, Amazon is fine. Applause Books is the publisher. And I do have a website, rogernygard.com, and I have
Well,
the
I'll go to
links
that.
there as well.
But
So,
what else is contained in the book? Because really, I feel that I kind of just, I don't know, I've watched a lot of movies and I kind of knew what I was going to do. But, and I've read a lot of books on filmmaking. And your editing book is superb, by the way. That editing book is so good. There it is. Oh my God. Cut to the monkey. Yes, and your book is also very funny. But this book I have not read as yet. What are the other sections, and what else would you say are other pitfalls for filmmakers?
All right. Well, I start out with the idea. How do you get the idea? And then how do you turn that into a documentary concept? Then it's about production, the nuts and bolts, and it's very difficult to make a movie because it's a lot of hard work, most of which you will have to do if you don't have a giant budget. A typical budget of a documentary, and that's another chapter, is scheduling and budgeting, is maybe $1 million, because it takes so long. If I'm going to spend 2 years of my life making a documentary, I've got to be paid 2 years of wages. Now, most documentaries are made in the $200,000 to $400,000 range when they go to film festivals, because they're self-financed, or they've got some dentists or friends, family, their own savings. And every one of my films, I look back, and they had basically the exact same budget, about $120,000 to $150,000. Hard costs. That's the core budget. On top of that are deferred salaries. And then on top of that is profit. And with Trekkies, we sold it to Paramount. It cost us about $350,000 with deferments. We sold it for 1.25 million. And so everything above $350,000 was profit split amongst the partners. So that's obviously where you want to be, in that rarefied area where you're in profit. But to get there, you've got to understand interviewing, you've got to understand pitching, you've got to understand contracts. You should paper everything. Anyone who gives any sort of creative input, make sure in their little deal memo it has the phrase, it's a work for hire. So you own the product. Like if you have someone make a poster for you, make sure you own it. And otherwise, they might come back to you later and want more money, or you've got to get a whole new poster made, or someone who designs your website. Tips like that, for instance, in the contracts chapter. Then post-production, there's format. There's so many choices of format. And so you need to know before you start, have a discussion with your post-production supervisor or your distributor. And if you don't have those, read my book so you know format, choose the right format. And having said that, the best film with the glossiest, best production with a terrible story is not going to sell. But a film with a great story shot on an iPhone with terrible production values may yet sell. So the most important thing is your story. And so I really stress in the book, here's how you make sure you've got a good story. And having said that, there's really two kinds of documentaries. I break it down. There's the narrative documentaries, which is all about the story, about a protagonist or a group of protagonists with goals and obstacles and a climactic ending and a resolution, whether it's a verdict or they get arrested or you find who you're searching for, what have you. There's a definitive ending solving the mystery. The other kind of documentary, which are much harder, and for some masochistic reason, it's the type I make, are concept documentaries, where instead of having a protagonist, your protagonist is the core question you're asking. In The Nature of Existence, my core question was, why do we exist? And I set out to solve that question, to solve that mystery by the end of the film. And Food Inc., similarly as I explained, why is corporate farming so harmful? That's the core question. It's a concept documentary, and maybe the filmmaker is the investigator. You're on camera, or maybe you have voiceover, or maybe you have Morgan Freeman, if you can afford him to be your narrator, or you have the people like Wild Wild Country. They interviewed people about this Bhagwan guru and intercut all their experiences, and they become the narrators. And so these are the things you have to consider and figure out as you're making your documentary. And all that said, you haven't even gotten to the point of selling it yet. So the back half of the book is, now that you've got your film, how do you sell it? Where do you go? And what's from film festivals to distributors to, do you need a film agent? Do you need a publicist? I go through all of that.
Well, your internet's a little janky. We can hear you perfectly. We have a lot of questions for you here. We'll go through as many as we can, questions and comments for you. So let's get to our audience here. Matthew Hammond for 2 says, what happens when the theme is not correct?
Yeah, you're screwed, man. You have to know your theme. I mean, what does it mean to be correct? I mean, if it doesn't follow the correct format, it's really just what's the idea you must express with this film? One of the types of films that's the hardest to sell, because there are so many, there's a glut, is someone dealing with a personal medical condition or someone in their family, a Lorenzo's Oil documentary type of thing. Many people make that. And so the theme is I want to save, or I want to survive, I want to help my family member. Survival is important, some version of that, but it's generally not clear. It's really just a personal journey. It's much harder for a film like that to stand out than one that has a very, like Michael Moore is very successful because his themes are very clear. U.S. healthcare is terrible. And why is it? And he sets out to find out. The U.S. has the biggest problem with guns of any country in the world. Why is it? And he sets out to find it out. It's very direct, straightforward, and aggressive sometimes, but that's what audiences like. They want to know where the filmmaker stands. And that doesn't mean you should edge into propaganda. You should never have a preconceived notion and work backwards to try to back up an ending. You need to follow the truth, the what you learn, and you want your audience to feel like you're genuinely being honest in search of that truth.
Here's a good follow-up from Patrick Lemire. Too many documentaries have their conclusion going in and their documentary is just propaganda. Having a theme going in can lead to being the opposite of a documentary. I think it's a fine line. You can go in with a theme, but the truth may guide you another way. What are your thoughts on Patrick's comment?
You do have to be open to your ending being completely different than what you thought it might be when you started out, because you've gathered more data. When I set out to find out why is marriage so difficult for people, I had some ideas about why that is. But the more I talked to marriage therapists and psychologists and people in relationships and marriages, the more I learned, my answer shifted. And by the ending, it was different than what I started out with, but it was genuine to the question, to the theme. I didn't violate the theme, but the answer itself, which became more nuanced.
Comment here from Bush and Rio Capper 2. Roger, please consider a doc about Morgan Freeman. You could get him to narrate the doc about himself.
That's hilarious. Wouldn't that be funny? Yeah, he narrates his own documentary. That's called a biography, right? A biographical documentary. And those can be very successful. You need someone who has lived a pretty interesting 3-act life. Not everyone has a 3-act structure in their life, but the ones that do make for interesting documentaries. A great example is The Kid Stays in the Picture, the Robert Evans documentary based on his book. They had the book to begin with, which was great for structuring the documentary. And he had a very exciting, interesting life filled with lots of conflict and challenges. And if Morgan Freeman's life, and I, from what I know, it probably is filled with lots of conflict and challenges, probably was very difficult getting started and achieving the level of success he did. He could be a great subject.
MG for 5 says, a question for Roger. How does a documentary script differ from a standard script for film or TV?
Almost no difference. I mean, it's 3-act storytelling, screenplay and documentary format are similar. Why is that, right? Well, it's not because there's a formula that the studios impose on filmmakers. It's that human beings like to have their stories told to them in a certain way. Ever since the Greeks knew this, Aristotle knew this. And so we as filmmakers or storytellers are trying to structure our product in a way that audiences will keep them entertained. So they'll stick to the end to get to the moral of the story. You've got to keep them entertained all the way to the end. That's why we keep them laughing in Trekkies as much as possible. And I think why that film succeeded, in addition to having a huge core audience, but was because it was so funny. Nobody expected it to be so funny. And you want to surprise audiences. That's another thing. They don't want to see what they've already seen. They want to see something, okay, it could be similar, but it's got to be different in some new, unique way. So those are some of the considerations.
I'll say for my film, I did not have a script. I had what I called a scriptment, which was I had an intro, I had an outro, the ending. I had all this stuff in the middle. It was like an extended outline. It was like 30 pages for my movie. And we did, it followed the beginning and end are pretty much there, but we changed a lot of things. We ultimately had more material in the script that we could do, but I
That's
don't know
good.
for
That's normal. That's how
yeah,
you did it, how it's done, right? And you've got a bunch of scenes now. Maybe you put them on note cards as you shoot them and move them around until you determine an order that works better as you're continually rewriting. Most of the writing, or a great deal of the writing in a documentary, occurs in the editing room
yeah,
as you're shooting because you can't know everything. Now, with The Kid Stays in the Picture, they stuck pretty closely to exactly what happened in his life. And so the structure was laid out very specifically from the start. But a concept documentary, you have your core question and all the sub questions, and that's the spine of your film, as opposed to a 3-act structure in a narrative sense. But even so, there are still probably, I'm sure there's 3 acts in your film. There's 3 acts
yep.
in most successful documentaries, even concept documentaries.
Well, it's fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. That's all I'll say. Comment here. Solomon Thornton, you directed the Bernie Mac show. Cool. Love that show.
That's where I learned to fist bump. The first person I ever fist bumped with was Bernie Mac because he was a bit of a germaphobe, because he had an autoimmune disease, which ultimately caught up with him. But I remember being on the set for the first time, and I was introduced to Bernie, and I put out my hand to shake, and he put out his fist, and I'm looking at it, what? And I figured, and so I fist bumped him, and I thought, this is great, because I'm a germaphobe as well. And so I've never stopped fist bumping from 2005 when I first met Bernie.
I'm a fist bump guy. I'm all about it. Razorburn says Trekkies was a good watch. Absolutely. And there was a Trekkies 2, right?
Yeah. Oh, the sequel now awaits you. If you enjoyed Trekkies 1, seek that out.
Yeah. Ray Locke says, first time I'm hearing making a documentary is like heroin.
I'll tell you why. Here's what's so exciting about it. When you sit down with someone, and there's a camera there, the camera's forcing you to ask deep questions. And so you begin to have a conversation on a very deep level, which is so enjoyable for you and the interview subject, because you're making eye contact and you're listening to what they have to say. One of the greatest joys for humans is when someone sees us and listens to us and cares about what we think and what we have to say. You rarely get that kind of conversation in everyday life because it stays on the surface, at work, or you're meeting someone for coffee, and you're talking about the weather or the Dodgers or whatever. But when you're asking deep questions, like, where do you think the soul resides? Is it a sin to masturbate? Is there a heaven? Where is it located exactly? Whatever your topic is, the deeper you go, the more you connect with someone, and you bond and you make friends. I made so many friends while making my documentaries all over the world, who I've often visited again when I'm traveling. So it's such a pleasure. By making a documentary, it forces us to be the type of person that we really want to be naturally, which is connected to other humans.
Matthew Hammond asks, can a theme be modified as more info is obtained?
Yes, it must be. It's constantly modified as you gather more data, like a scientist's theorem would be. And maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll stay exactly the same. And who knows? Because that's part of the excitement, part of the journey. You don't know exactly where you're headed.
Bushin Ryu Cat asks, did you do a pitch for Curb Your Enthusiasm? If so, remember how it went? I want to learn. Like, how did you get that job?
Well, I went in to basically audition as an editor to edit the film. And on a show like that, the editor is crucial because they don't have a script per se. They have an outline, and then all the dialogue is improvised. So every scene has different dialogue in it. Every scene, every take might have variances in the performance and the story, as well as the dialogue. So the editor is relied upon to rewrite the script in the editing room. So for me, my pitch was, you should hire me as an editor. And that was in the form of a meeting with Larry David. I got a phone call from the post-production executive at HBO who said, Greg Glickman, who said, hey, we're looking for a new editor. We've got an editor leaving. There's 2 editors on the show. Are you interested in meeting Larry David and being considered? And this was early in my editing career. I was mostly directing television and making my documentaries. And So I thought, I've never really thought of editing as a career, but I would love to work with Larry David. Yes. However, I was in India at the time shooting The Nature of Existence, and I said, I'm not available for another 3.5 weeks. So if the job's still available when I get back, I'm happy to meet. Got back, it was still open. I found out later they had met or talked to 25 editors, narrowed it down to 7, 3 of which they selected to meet with Larry, of which I was one of the 3. And Trekkies was a big help because the other editor had seen Trekkies and liked it and understood that making documentaries was very similar to the type of editing on Curb. My meeting with Larry David was less than 5 minutes. I went to the set, was waiting in the trailer. He came in. He said, he was between scenes, and he said, so why do you want to work on this show? And I said, because I want to learn from you, Larry. I want to learn how you do what you do. Fascinated by it. And he laughed and said, oh, you can't learn anything from me. And part of the secret to, and I write about this in the book, if you want to get a job, if you're going to a job interview, and it's the same if you're on a date or you want to seduce somebody, flattery, open with flattery. And especially if it's genuine, if you can make it genuine, all the better. And so I was subtly flattering Larry by telling him I wanted to learn from him, that I saw him, I respected him and who he is. And, if you're going to meet to get a job as a director, you're meeting with the producers, you go into the office, look for something in the office that, like, he's got sports memorabilia. Say, oh, you're a big Vikings fan. I love the Vikings. Bond with them in some little way. Or family photos. Oh, you have such a beautiful family. How old are your kids? Some little thing. And then you need to praise the show. This is the greatest script I've ever read. This is the best show on TV. That's how you get the job. If you don't do that, you're less likely to be selected for that position. But if you do, it just increases your chances. And so with Larry, it was similar. I also said to him that I really thought he was one of the greatest comedian television actors of our time, sort of like a modern day Phil Silvers. And Larry laughed, and it turned out Phil Silvers was one of Larry's idols. The Marx Brothers and Phil Silvers, when I asked him who did he idolize the most when he was sort of coming up as a comedian, and that's who he mentioned. So it was kind of a lucky shot on my part as well.
So basically compliment and blow smoke up their ass.
As genuine smoke, if possible.
Genuine smoke. That's great. Do you hear that, Alan?
Yes. You're great, Chris. I mean,
by the way, this is one of the greatest podcasts. This is one of the greatest podcasts I've ever been on.
Oh, well, thanks. We have fun here. Can
I ask you real quick? You did an episode of The Office, the grief counseling. That seems to be one of the more emotional episodes as well. Were you brought in specifically for that episode, or how did that work out?
Yeah, that was the theme of that episode is death, right? Yeah. Dealing with death, and Michael is dealing with his own mortality because his friend Ed Truck gets decapitated in an accident. Someone we don't meet, right? He just learns about it. And so for the whole show, he's trying to make everyone else care about him after he's gone, and no one gives a shit, right? But it ends with a bird funeral. He forces everyone to go outside and have a funeral for a bird that he finds dead by the front door. And in that case, it was just my agent sending out my reel. I just made another short film, and I'd worked on the Bernie Mac show, and they looked at that and gave me a shot to edit an episode, or to direct an episode.
Real quick, from Matthew Hammond for 2, we lost Bernie Mac too soon.
Yeah.
And
that was so sad. Yeah. 5 seasons wasn't enough of the Bernie Mac show. He was getting ready for season 6.
And final question here from Hey, It's Me in HD. Mr. Nygard, is there much directing involved in documentaries?
Yeah, what do you call it? I mean, the filmmaking, it's filmmaking, right? Where you generally you do everything. Yes, there's a director, there's an editor, there's a producer. I've been all of those on my documentary. And I've been only the editor and a co-producer on the Comedy Store documentary. And sometimes there's no writing credit because there isn't really someone writing it. You're just out gathering footage and then cutting it together. So it depends, whatever feels right. But the short answer is yes. There's a director. Who's the person whose theme, whose idea, whose premise is pushing it forward, and then determining what to cut, what to keep, maybe writing the script, working with a writer. There's someone who's determining all the creative choices.
And we'll leave it at that. RogerNygard.com is where you can get all the info about your work. Your book, The Documentarian, is on Amazon. You've got links to your books. In your book, you have a book section on your website. Film work, television work. You have been, look at look at this. Here's the posters for your films. And I love The Nature of Existence was so good. That one is amazing. And 6 Days in Roswell, just consistent. You're so prolific, Roger. Thank you for sharing all your information with our audience. We will put the links in the description, and thank you for just being so willing to share. And also, I know we had to bump you from one show to this, so thank you for being amenable to change. This show can be crazy sometimes, but
of course.
But you're so awesome with your work, and the fact that you want to, because not everyone in Hollywood is like this. You know, they keep info close to the chest. They don't want to share. You share. Here's how I did it. If you want to do it, go ahead. Here's some useful suggestions. You do that with everything when you're doing a podcast or an interview or in your books. And I thank you for all your work.
Thanks. It's not just me too. In the books, it's Larry David's wisdom. I interviewed Larry for the book, and several showrunners I worked with, Sacha Baron Cohen, and in the documentary book, I interviewed Davis Guggenheim and Frederick Wiseman, and Errol Morris, and many others. And so I gathered the wisdom of my peers in the field to include in the books.
Well, thank you so much, Roger. I'm sure you'll be back with another movie and probably another book at some point.
I guarantee it.
Awesome. Congrats and continued success with everything you do. And Alan and I are both going to blow metaphorical smoke up your ass right now.
Totally
care,
works.
Roger.
It's working. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.